I always thought the hardest part of loving someone was the fear of losing them. Turns out, I was completely wrong. The hardest part is the quiet aftermath. The moment you realize the person you were willing to take a bullet for was the one holding the gun the entire time. My name is Ethan, and until about 6 months ago, I thought I had everything a 28-year-old guy could reasonably ask for in Austin, Texas. I had a decent job in tech sales that paid enough for a nice 2-bedroom apartment in a trendy neighborhood, a solid circle of friends, and most importantly, I had Chloe. Chloe and I had been together for 4 years. We met during our senior year at UT, back when our biggest worries were passing finals and finding cheap beer on 6th Street. She was this vibrant, fiercely independent girl from Dallas, with a laugh that could cut through the loudest room. From the moment we started dating, we were inseparable. We built a life together, step by step. We survived the awkward post-grad transition, the financial stress of our first real jobs, and eventually the big move into our own place. By our 3rd anniversary, I knew she was the one. I had already started looking at rings, calculating how many months of commission checks it would take to buy the diamond she deserved. Then Mark came back into the picture. Mark had been my best friend since middle school.
We grew up in the same suburban neighborhood, played on the same high school football team, and even though he went to a different college out of state, we never lost touch. Mark was always the charismatic one, the guy who could walk into a room of total strangers and leave with 5 new best friends. But he was also reckless. He lived on the edge, constantly chasing the next big thrill, the next business venture, or the next girl. I was the stable one, the anchor. Whenever Mark spun out of control, I was the guy who picked up the pieces. About 8 months ago, Mark's life completely unraveled. A startup he had invested all his savings into collapsed, and his girlfriend at the time kicked him out of their apartment in Denver. He called me from a rest stop somewhere on I-35, sounding completely broken. He had nothing left but a trunk full of clothes and a Maxima with a leaking radiator. I didn't even hesitate. I told him to drive straight to Austin and that he could crash on our couch until he got back on his feet. When I told Chloe, she was a little hesitant at first. She liked Mark, but she valued our privacy. Our apartment was spacious, but having a third person in your living space changes the dynamic of a relationship. Still, she knew how much Mark meant to me, and she agreed. I told her it would only be for a few weeks, a month at the very most. I never could have predicted that those few weeks would completely dismantle my life.
The first month actually went surprisingly well. Mark was incredibly grateful. He kept the living room spotless, cooked dinner for us a few nights a week, and actively went out for job interviews during the day. It felt like a throwback to our college days, just 3 friends hanging out, drinking IPAs on the balcony, and talking about the future. Chloe's initial reservations seemed to melt away. She and Mark developed this easy, comfortable banter. They would argue about music, trade jokes, and talk about trashy reality TV shows that I couldn't stand. I was happy. I loved the woman I was going to marry, and I was helping my oldest friend get his life back together. I felt like I had everything under control. But as the weeks stretched into the 2nd month, the dynamic began to shift in subtle ways that I didn't notice at first. Mark got a job at a local marketing agency, which meant he had money in his pocket again. He offered to start paying rent, but I refused, telling him to save up for his own place instead. Looking back, that was my first major mistake. Because he wasn't leaving, he was becoming a permanent fixture in our home, an uninvited third wheel in our intimacy. I started noticing little things. I'd come home from a long, grueling day at the office, exhausted from corporate politics and hitting quotas, and I'd find Chloe and Mark sitting on the couch together, laughing hysterically at some inside joke. The moment I walked through the door, the laughter would die down a bit, replaced by a polite, welcoming tone that felt just a fraction off center. Or I'd notice how Chloe started dressing up a little more around the apartment. She stopped wearing her oversized college hoodies and started wearing silk camisoles and fitted leggings. When I complimented her, she'd just shrug and say she wanted to feel cute. I didn't question it. Why would I? This was Chloe, the girl who had held my hand through my worst moments. And this was Mark, the guy who had sworn a blood oath of loyalty to me when we were kids. The emotional distance between Chloe and me grew so gradually that I could easily blame it on work stress. Whenever I tried to initiate a deep conversation or plan a romantic date night just for the two of us, she always seemed tired or distracted. She was spending more time on her phone, smiling at notifications, and turning the screen away whenever I sat down next to her. If I asked who she was texting, she'd always give a casual, dismissive answer, like, "Oh, just a group chat with the girls from work," or "Just my mom." I trusted her implicitly, so I never pushed. I never checked her phone. I thought jealousy was a toxic trait, a sign of insecurity. I prided myself on being a mature, supportive partner. I was practically handing them the matches to burn my life down. One Friday evening in late November, everything reached a boiling point, though I didn't know it yet. I was supposed to fly out to Dallas for a weekend regional conference. It was a mandatory event, the kind of corporate networking nightmare that I absolutely dreaded. Chloe kissed me goodbye at the door, her lips lingering just a second less than usual, telling me to drive safely and have a productive trip. Mark gave me a firm handshake and told me he'd keep an eye on the place. I drove off into the Texas twilight, feeling a heavy weight in my chest that I couldn't quite explain. I assumed it was just the dread of spending 48 hours talking about sales metrics. I made it about halfway to Dallas, right around Waco, when I received an urgent email from my regional director. The conference had been abruptly canceled due to a massive plumbing failure at the hotel venue, which had flooded the entire main convention floor. The event was being rescheduled for the following month, and everyone was told to return home. A wave of pure relief washed over me. I wouldn't have to spend my weekend trapped in a hotel conference room. I could go home, surprise Chloe, and we could finally have that quiet, intimate weekend together that we desperately needed. I didn't call her to tell her I was turning around. I wanted it to be a genuine surprise. I stopped by a local grocery store on the way back, picking up a bottle of her favorite expensive Cabernet, some ribeye steaks, and a bouquet of fresh eucalyptus that she loved to keep in the kitchen. It was just past midnight when I pulled into the parking garage of our apartment complex. The night was unseasonably warm, the air thick and quiet. As I walked up the concrete stairs to our third-floor unit, my heart was actually beating with excitement. I pictured her face when I walked in, how she would smile and wrap her arms around my neck, complaining about how much she missed me, even though I had only been gone for a few hours. I reached our door, unlocked it quietly, and stepped inside. The apartment was completely dark, save for the faint, flickering glow of the television in the living room. The TV was on mute, casting long, eerie shadows across the walls. The kitchen was a mess, with 2 empty wine glasses sitting on the counter, next to a half-eaten plate of takeout. A strange, cold sensation began to settle in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't logic yet. It was pure, primal instinct, telling me that something was profoundly wrong. The silence in the apartment felt heavy, suffocating. I set the grocery bags down softly on the kitchen island, making sure the wine bottle didn't clink. I took a slow step toward the hallway that led to our master bedroom. As I drew closer, I realized the door was slightly ajar, a sliver of warm light spilling out onto the hardwood floor. And then I heard it, a soft, muffled sound that shattered the quiet of the night. It was a sound I knew intimately, a sound that belonged only to me, or so I had believed. It was the sound of Chloe's breath catching, followed by a low, familiar whisper that didn't belong to me. My feet felt like they were cemented to the floor. The air in the hallway suddenly turned ice cold, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to turn around, to run out of the apartment, to pretend I had never turned that car around in Waco. But my mind was locked in a state of absolute, horrifying disbelief. This was a nightmare. It had to be. I was going to wake up in a motel room on the highway, groggy and relieved. I took another step forward, my bare socks making no sound against the wood. The sliver of light from the bedroom door seemed to stretch, casting a long, distorted shadow of myself against the wall. I reached out, my hand trembling so violently I could barely grip the brass doorknob. I pushed the door open, just a few inches more, just enough to see inside. The reality of what I saw didn't hit me all at once. It came in agonizing, high-definition waves. The ambient light from Chloe's bedside lamp illuminated the room. My bed, the mattress we had picked out together, the sheets I had washed just the day before, was a chaotic mess of blankets. And there they were,
Mark's back was turned to me, his shoulders rising and falling with heavy breath. Chloe was beneath him, her eyes closed, her fingers knotted tightly into the hair at the back of his neck.
Her face bore an expression of intense, uninhibited passion, a look she hadn't given me in over a year. She whispered his name, a soft, breathless plea that tore through my chest like a jagged blade. It was a total, absolute desecration of everything I thought was sacred in my life. I didn't yell. I didn't storm into the room and throw punches, which is what I always assumed a man would do in that situation. Instead, a profound, deafening silence filled my head. The sheer weight of the betrayal seemed to paralyze my vocal cords. My childhood best friend, the woman I was going to buy a ring for, they were occupying the exact space where my future was supposed to live, completely erasing me from the equation without a single shred of guilt. I must have made a sound, or maybe the shift in the room's air current gave me away. Mark suddenly froze, his posture stiffened, and he slowly turned his head toward the door. When his eyes met mine, the color completely drained from his face. He looked like he had just seen a ghost. "Ethan?" he choked out, his voice cracking. The moment his voice broke the silence, Chloe's eyes snapped open. She looked past Mark's shoulder, straight at me. I will never forget the look of sheer, unadulterated terror that crossed her face. It wasn't regret. It was the panic of a thief caught red-handed. She let out a sharp, ragged gasp and immediately pulled the duvet up to her chin, scrambling backward against the headboard as if she could somehow disappear into the wall. "Ethan, oh my God, Ethan, wait," she stammered, her voice shaking uncontrollably. I didn't say a single word. I couldn't. If I opened my mouth, I felt like I would either vomit or completely lose my sanity. I just stared at them for what felt like an eternity, letting the silence heavy pack the room. Mark scrambled out of the bed, clumsily grabbing his jeans from the floor, trying to pull them on while keeping his eyes fixed on me, as if he expected me to pull out a weapon. "Bro, listen to me. It's not what it looks like, I swear to God. Let me explain," Mark pleaded, his hands raised in a defensive gesture. It was the ultimate pathetic cliché. It's not what it looks like. The utter absurdity of that phrase coming from a man standing naked in my bedroom next to my girlfriend made a dark, cynical laugh bubble up in my throat, though no sound came out. The betrayal was so absolute, so devastatingly complete, that any explanation he could offer would just be background noise. I slowly stepped back from the doorway. I walked down the hall, my movements completely mechanical, like a robot operating on a dying battery. I went into the living room, picked up my car keys from the kitchen island where I had placed them just minutes ago, and turned toward the front door. "Ethan, please, don't leave." "Chloe," shrieked from the bedroom. I could hear her frantic footsteps running down the hallway behind me. She had thrown on my oversized flannel shirt, the one she always stole from my closet, and she looked completely disheveled, tears streaming down her makeup-smudged face. She reached out to grab my arm, but I flinched away from her touch, as if she were coated in acid. "Don't touch me," I said. My voice didn't sound like my own. It was entirely flat, completely devoid of emotion, a cold, dead register that seemed to shock her more than if I had screamed. "Ethan, please. It was a mistake. It just happened. We were drinking and—" "How long?" I interrupted, staring at the front door, refusing to look at her face. I couldn't look at her without seeing her in that bed with Mark. "What?" she whispered, trembling. "How long, Chloe?" I turned my head just enough to catch her eye. The cold intensity in my gaze made her step back. She swallowed hard, fresh tears spilling over her eyelids. She couldn't look me in the eye. She looked down at the floor, her silence giving me the exact answer I dreaded. It wasn't a one-time mistake. It wasn't a drunken accident from tonight. This had been going on right under my nose, in my own home, while I was out working myself to the bone to provide a life for us. Every inside joke, every secret smile, every time she turned her phone away, it all clicked into place with a sickening clarity. Mark walked into the living room now, his shirt on but unbuttoned, looking small, pathetic, and terrified. "Man, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. We got caught up in something." I looked at Mark, the guy who had sat at my family's Thanksgiving table, the guy who knew every secret I had ever kept. "You have until tomorrow morning to get every single piece of your shit out of my apartment," I said, my voice dangerously low. "If I ever see your face again, Mark, I swear to God, you'll find out exactly what I'm capable of." He nodded quickly, looking down, completely broken. He didn't say another word. I opened a front door and stepped out into the humid Texas night. Chloe tried to follow me into the breezeway, crying my name, begging me to stay so we could talk, but I didn't stop. I walked down the stairs, ignoring her cries echoing through the quiet complex. I got into my truck, turned the key, and drove. I didn't have a destination. I just drove up and down I-35, watching the neon signs of Austin blur past my windshield. The tears didn't come immediately. For the first 2 hours, I was just completely numb, gripped by a strange, hollow shock. My mind kept looping the image of them in the bed, playing it over and over like a twisted film reel I couldn't switch off. The sense of violation was physical. I felt a heavy, suffocating pressure on my chest, making it hard to draw a full breath. Around 3 a.m., I pulled into the empty parking lot of a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of the city. I turned off the engine, gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, and finally, the dam broke. I sobbed until my ribs ached, a primal, guttural release of pure agony. I felt like my entire identity, the past 4 years of my life, and every plan I had for the future had been completely vaporized in a single instant. The two people I trusted most in the entire world had conspired to destroy me, and they had done it in the place where I was supposed to feel safest. I spent the rest of the night parked in that dark lot, watching the sun slowly rise over the Texas horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange. The city was waking up. People were starting their weekends, oblivious to the fact that my world had completely ended. As the light filled the cab of my truck, a cold, hard resolve began to take the place of the sorrow. The shock was fading, replaced by a deep, simmering anger. They had broken me, but I wasn't going to let them keep me down. I started the engine, pulled out of the lot, and headed back to the apartment to reclaim what was left of my life. By the time I pulled back into the apartment complex, it was just past 7 in the morning. The Saturday sun was fully up, casting a bright, unforgiving glare over the concrete buildings. Walking up those stairs for the second time in less than 8 hours felt like marching toward an execution. My body was running on pure adrenaline and a dangerous amount of emotional exhaustion. When I unlocked the door, the apartment was dead silent. The heavy scent of stale wine and the underlying trace of Chloe's perfume hung in the air, making me instantly nauseous. I walked into the living room and found Mark's things completely gone. The air mattress he had been using after transitioning off the couch was deflated and rolled up by the door, and his duffel bags were nowhere to be seen. True to my word, he had cleared out. He was a coward, and cowards always run when the lights get turned on. Chloe was sitting on the edge of the couch, still wearing my flannel shirt. Her eyes were red, swollen, and hollowed out from a night of crying. She looked up at me as I walked in, her face tightening with a desperate, pathetic hope. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice completely hoarse. "You came back." "I came back for my life, Chloe, not for you," I said, keeping my distance. I stood by the kitchen island, placing a physical barrier between us. "Where is he?" "He left. He took his stuff and caught an Uber to a motel near the airport," she said, burying her face in her hands. "Ethan, please, just let me speak. I am so incredibly sorry. It's the biggest mistake of my life. I don't love him. I don't care about him. It was just... I felt lonely, and you were always working, and he was just here, and things got completely out of hand. It didn't mean anything, I swear to you." Hearing her blame my work ethic for her choice to sleep with my best friend was like a physical slap in the face. The sheer lack of accountability made my blood run cold. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized for the first time that the woman sitting in front of me wasn't the Chloe I had fallen in love with. The Chloe I loved would never have done this. this was a stranger wearing her face. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm, even as my hands trembled. "You didn't just have an affair, Chloe. You took my childhood friend, the guy who knew everything about me, and you brought him into our bed. You turned our home into a lie. Every single day for the last few months, you looked me in the eye, told me you loved me, and then waited for me to leave the room so you could text him." "It wasn't like that," she cried, standing up and taking a step toward me. "It wasn't a plan. It just started as talking, and then we crossed a line and we didn't know how to stop. We were both terrified of hurting you." "Terrified of hurting me?" I let out a sharp, bitter laugh that echoed off the high ceilings. "You weren't terrified of hurting me, Chloe. You were terrified of getting caught. If I hadn't turned my car around in Waco last night, you two would be in that bed right now. You'd be planning how to look me in the eye when I got back on Sunday evening. Don't you dare stand there and pretend you gave a single damn about my feelings." She fell silent. Her shoulders slumped, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. The absolute truth of my words hit her, stripping away whatever defensive delusion she had built up in her mind to make herself feel like the victim of a complicated situation. It wasn't complicated. It was cheap, selfish, and cruel. "I want you gone," I said, the finality in my tone hanging heavy in the room. "I'm going to stay at a hotel for the weekend. When I come back on Monday morning, I want all your things out of this apartment. I'll talk to the leasing office about breaking the lease or taking your name off it. But as far as you and I are concerned, we are completely over." "Ethan, please don't do this," she begged, dropping to her knees, grabbing at the air between us as if she could pull me back. "We can go to counseling. We can fix this. We've built 4 years together. You can't just throw it all away over a mistake." "I'm not throwing it away," I said, looking down at her one last time. "You threw it away the second you let him into this room. I'm just burying the corpse." I didn't pack a bag. I didn't grab any sentimental items. I just turned my back on her cries, walked out of the apartment, and closed the door behind me. That sound, the sharp metallic click of the deadbolt locking, felt like the final punctuation mark on a long, painful chapter of my life. I checked into a sterile, soulless extended stay hotel on the north side of Austin. For the next 48 hours, I lived in a state of suspended animation. I didn't call anyone. I didn't check social media. I ignored the dozens of frantic text messages and missed calls from Chloe, and the lengthy, paragraph-long paragraphs of apologies from Mark that kept lighting up my phone screen. I blocked both of their numbers by Saturday afternoon. The silence was deafening, but it was necessary. I needed to let the anger burn itself out so I could figure out my next move. On Monday morning, I returned to the apartment. My heart was in my throat as I unlocked the door, terrified of what I might find. But when I stepped inside, the space was empty, truly empty. Chloe had taken everything that belonged to her. The living room was missing her favorite velvet armchair, the bookshelf was half bare, and the walls were stripped of the framed photos of us from our trips to Cabo in New York. The bedroom was completely hollowed out. She had taken the bedding, leaving only the bare, uncovered mattress sitting on the wooden frame. It looked like a crime scene. In a way, it was. I sat down on the edge of that bare mattress, looking around the empty room. The silence was no longer suffocating. It was just vast. The anger was gone, replaced by a profound, echoing emptiness. I was a 28-year-old man, completely alone in a city where my entire social structure had been built around a relationship that no longer existed, and a friendship that had turned to ash. Over the next 3 months, I threw myself into my work with a desperate, manic energy. I logged 12-hour days, hitting numbers my company hadn't seen in quarters. I went to the gym until my muscles screamed. I did everything I could to outrun the memories. On the outside, it looked like I was recovering perfectly. My boss was thrilled, my bank account was growing, and I had lost 15 pounds of stress weight. But on the inside, I was a ghost. Every time I saw a couple holding hands on the street or heard a song that Chloe used to sing in the shower, a cold wave of betrayal would wash over me all over again. I had developed a deep, cynical armor. I convinced myself that trust was a liability, that love was just an illusion people used until something better came along. Then, out of nowhere, on a rainy Tuesday evening in February, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. Usually I'd ignore it, but for some reason, I answered. "Ethan?"
The voice was soft, fragile, and instantly recognizable. It was Chloe. My heart stopped for a beat, the old protective instinct flaring up before my cynical armor slammed back down. "Chloe," I said, my voice completely level. "Why are you calling me from a new number?"
I changed my number a while ago," she stammered. She sounded different. The confident, vibrant girl from college was entirely gone. She sounded tired, broken, and small. "Ethan, I know I shouldn't be calling you. I know I have no right, but I'm back in Austin. I'm staying at a coffee shop near your office. Please, I just need 10 minutes of your time. There's something I need to tell you, something you deserve to know." My first instinct was to hang up the phone. I stared out the window of my office, watching the rain strike the glass and blur the neon lights of downtown Austin. The cynical armor I had spent the last 3 months building was screaming at me to cut the cord, to protect the fragile peace I had fought so hard to achieve. But curiosity is a vicious thing, and underneath the anger, there was still a hollow ache that wanted answers. I wanted to see the look in her eyes now that the dust had settled. I wanted to know if the destruction of my life had been worth whatever she was chasing. 10 minutes, I said, my voice cutting through the line like ice. The houndstooth coffee on Congress. I'll be there in 15. When I walked into the coffee shop, the warmth of the roasted beans and the low murmur of indie music felt entirely mismatched with the storm inside my chest. I scanned the room and found her sitting in a corner booth, staring into a ceramic mug. She looked smaller than I remembered. She had lost weight, her face pale, the dark circles under her eyes poorly hidden by makeup. When she looked up and saw me approaching, a look of profound relief and intense fear crossed her features. I sat down across from her, keeping my coat on. I didn't order a drink. I didn't smile. I just folded my hands on the table and looked at her. "You have 10 minutes, Chloe. Make it count." She swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she wrapped them tighter around her mug. "Thank you for coming, Ethan. Truly. I didn't think you would answer, let alone show up." "I'm not here for small talk," I said flatly. "What do you want?" "I wanted to tell you the truth," she whispered, a tear immediately escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. "I wanted to look you in the eye and tell you that leaving that apartment was the biggest mistake of my life. The moment you walked out that door in November, everything completely fell apart." "Is that supposed to make me feel bad?" I asked, a bitter edge slipping into my voice. "You tore my life to shreds. Forfeiting your own doesn't balance the scales." "I know," she sobbed softly, putting her hand over her mouth to stifle the sound so she wouldn't draw the attention of the other customers. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Ethan. I know I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that Mark is gone. He's completely out of the picture." "I don't care about Mark," I said, though a sharp jolt of adrenaline hit my stomach. "What happened?" Chloe let out a long, ragged breath, looking down at the table. "After you left, he moved into a motel, and I went back to Dallas to stay with my sister. Mark kept calling me, telling me that now that we were out in the open, we could finally be together. He convinced me that what we had was real, that it was worth the sacrifice. I was so confused, so overwhelmed with guilt, that I listened to him. He moved up to Dallas a few weeks later, and we rented a tiny apartment together." She paused, a look of pure disgust passing over her face, disgust directed entirely at herself. It took exactly 2 weeks for the illusion to shatter. Without the thrill of the secret, without the betrayal, there was nothing there. Mark didn't want a relationship. He wanted a fantasy. He didn't get a job. He expected me to pay for everything, just like he expected you to support him. He started drinking heavily, staying out late, and when I confronted him about it, he blamed me. He told me that if I could betray a guy like you, someone who had done everything for me, then he could never trust me either. The sheer poetic justice of her words hit me like a physical wave. I sat back in the booth, let out a slow, cynical breath. The irony was almost suffocating. Mark, the parasite who had destroyed my life, had used the exact same moral compass to destroy hers. They had built a foundation on a graveyard of loyalty, and they were shocked when the ground collapsed beneath them. "He left 3 weeks ago," Chloe continued, her voice hollow.
He cleared out the bank account we shared, took his clothes, and drove back to Colorado. He blocked my number. He did to me exactly what he did to you, only he took my money with him. I was left standing in an empty apartment, completely broke, realizing that I had traded a king for a thief. I threw away a man who loved me, who was building a future for me, for a ghost. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing against the sleeve of my coat. Her eyes were begging, filled with a desperate, pathetic longing that made my stomach turn. Ethan, I still love you. I never stopped loving you. I got lost, I got caught up in the attention, and I paid the ultimate price for it. I'm back in Austin. I got a new job. I want to know if there is any world, any universe, where we can start over. Even if it takes years, I'll do whatever it takes to prove myself to you again. I looked at her hand resting near mine. A few months ago, the sight of her crying, begging for my touch, would have broken me. I would have wrapped her in my arms, told her we could fix it, and swallowed my own pride just to keep her safe. But looking at her now, all I felt was a profound, echoing emptiness. The love hadn't just died, it had been entirely erased by the reality of what she was capable of. She didn't miss me. She missed the safety I provided. She missed the stability she had casually thrown away until the cold reality of the world hit her in the face. I slowly pulled my hand away, placing it in my pocket. I stood up, buttoning my coat against the chill of the evening. "I'm sorry Mark did that to you, Chloe," I said, my voice completely steady, devoid of malice, anger, or pity. It was the voice of a man who had completely crossed the river to the other side. "But you didn't trade a king for a thief. You showed me who you really were when the doors were closed. You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. And choices have expiration dates." "Ethan, please," she wept, looking up at me from the booth, her face completely shattered. "Don't walk away like this." "Goodbye, Chloe," I said. I turned my back on her and walked out of the coffee shop. As I stepped into the rain, the cool drops hitting my face felt incredibly clean. For the last 3 months, I had been carrying the weight of their betrayal, wondering what was wrong with me, wondering how I could have been so blind. But watching her sit in that booth, broken by the very monster she had helped create, I realized that the betrayal was never about my shortcomings. It was about theirs. I walked down Congress Avenue, the city lights reflecting in the wet pavement like a sea of glass. The pain wasn't entirely gone. It would take a long time to completely scrub the stains of those 4 years from my heart. But the armor was gone. I didn't need it anymore. I was 28 years old. My life was entirely my own again. And for the first time since that terrible night in November, I could look toward the horizon without seeing their shadows standing in the way. I was going to be just fine.